All right. So before we start, I want to say how many of you guys use SBT? How many? Awesome. Okay. How many of you guys love SBT? How many of you guys hate SBT? Okay. So I'm the product owner of SBT at TypeSafe. I started out as a hater. I'll be honest. Okay, I was a big Maven fan, and I really started out as a hater, and I have progressed. So what I want to cover quick before we talk about a 1.0, which is where we're headed, is what was good about SBT. What actually drew me to it? And it's basically two things. One was plus publish. This was a necessary thing in the Scala ecosystem. Plus publish is I want to republish this library against multiple Scala versions, right? This actually enabled us to get over the binary incompatibility hump that we were in, or slump, or whatever, which was just madness in the early 2.6 days. Anyone remember 2.6? Yeah, good times. These guys here. Anyway. 2.7 was still bad. It wasn't until 2.9 that things actually started to stabilize, and we didn't necessarily need it, but we still use it to cross 2.10, 2.9. It's still very useful. Yeah, anyway. It's good when every release of every library doesn't break all of your code. This is a good place to be. But the big one is actually test quick. So test quick combined with tilde is where SBT watches your sources. Okay? It will incrementally recompile based on the local change that it has. It will use the incremental compilation to look at the dependencies of your unit tests and try to figure out which ones to run. Okay? So that, I think, is the epitome of SBT, is we have, by virtue of having not really great IDE support for a really long time in Scala, become the developer experience of Scala. We are the IDE, almost. The other thing that's been really great is a really diverse plugin ecosystem. At SBT, the core of it is a type-safe key-value map, which is really pluggable, if you think about it. And type-safe. So I think our plugins have sort of benefited from that, and we have a ton of them very quickly. We use Scala as a build language, which I think is the main reason we exist in the Scala ecosystem. That's all I'll say about that. And the SBT, one thing I think we learned from Maven is that having a standard is important, but actually being able to customize that standard for your company is also important. And if you make one of those easy and one of those hard, you're actually asking for pain later. So that's one of the fundamentals behind SBT. You get a default build, which is right now the open source standard of how you should make an open source project. And then you can customize as needed. OK, so that's the path. What was bad about early SBT? Well, yeah, Ivy. It's still the best conceptual model for dependencies out there. It beats the hell out of Maven. I wouldn't go to Aether. In fact, we were in talks about moving to Aether. Unless things change, I don't think that's going to happen. But Ivy is, there's really no development going on it, and it actually has a lot of integration issues with Maven that we've been fighting. So we'll make a decision about that later. That's not a 1.0 thing, but we acknowledge that this is a problem. Okay? And then we had pretty poor documentation. The documentation is still terse. We at least have a getting started guide that's getting up there, but there'll be a lot of investment going on in documentation. And then the really ugly, for some people perhaps, we actually just completely threw away OO. I'm going to make this claim, and I'm not going to back it up because I can, and I only have 15 minutes. The hardest thing to understand in Scala is trait linearization. The hardest thing to reason about in your own code is trait linearization. So we had to throw it out the window. It was too much for ourselves and for our clients to actually deal with effectively. A whole bunch of just fundamental bugs that we couldn't solve, so we threw it away for our core engine. Now, there's a lot of things in a build tool that you have to worry about that isn't true for a lot of other situations. You could use Daniel's cake pattern things and deal with the madness yourself. We actually just backed off on that. The other thing that we had was around the time SBT came around, there were a lot of symbolic APIs. How many of you guys know what this line does, the first line? How many? Just curious. Anyone? Yeah, OK, cool. Yeah, so that's we have this path API that we tried to base off of Ant, and there's the one thing that people loved more than the XML of Ant was the symbolic paths. So we got it right. Anyway, so we're listening. If you look at what we've done in SBT to try to improve that, we improved the build format in 0.13. Okay, when we moved from 0.0 to this key value mappings. The first API was all these applicative functors on tasks. We didn't call them that because it still wasn't cool. I think it's okay here to call them applicative functors, I hope. Is it cool? Okay. Yeah, so we actually kind of stole some of Jason Zog's time and a lot of Mark Harris and got the same kind of async macro-y stuff going on in the SBT build file to make the syntax look a heck of a lot better. The only thing that I'm noticing that's kind of a concern is people don't realize that this is still asynchronous. If you declare a dependency on a key, it's not computed right where you wrote it. It's actually computed asynchronously somewhere else. Other than that, I think the syntax has really cleaned up a lot of SBT build files. We did a lot with Ivy, a lot of little stuff that you probably don't notice, besides I don't have to delete the Ivy cache all the time, only every once in a while. So that's good. And then we did a big revamp of the Getting Started guide in 0.12. And with 0.13, you're seeing some new interesting things come out, such as .previous to define incremental tasks. That'll be in the 0.13 to release notes. Let's talk about vision, because I don't have enough time for anything else. OK, so the future. We're actually, what we're doing is we're turning SBT into a server. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. And we're trying to clean up how plugins get implemented. The 1.0 is we're taking a lot of the cleanups we did in 0.13 and 0.12. We're going to leverage what we're good at and get it to a releasable point. Okay? You're going to continue to enjoy the stability of binary compatible incremental releases for a full year on the platform. So you shouldn't have to upgrade SBT all the time, as was common in the whole Scala ecosystem when we were invented. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the server. What's this all about? What does it actually mean? There's a realization in build tools where basically a build tool is working against the file system, and it's this giant shared piece of mutable state. And shared mutable state really makes software easy to reason about and figure out what's going on. So we never ran into issues. So what we want to do with this is we're at the second level of tooling in the Scala ecosystem. And this is where things like Emacs, things like Eclipse, there's this thing called Activator, they are actually pulling in the SBT build. And we have a bunch of users who are using SBT as their development environment with tilde test quick. All of those features that we're delivering in SBT, we actually want to leverage everywhere for everyone. So what we're doing, we're working with the Eclipse team. We're in talks with IntelliJ. Activator already does this, but you can start SBT as a server and execute commands on it and get events back. So it's an asynchronous event-driven server. When you write a plugin, you're going to be operating not on a local terminal, but inside of a server somewhere, and you can connect back to the terminal. I have a prototype. If anyone wants to see it, I'll show it to you. Don't have enough time to go into it. But essentially, all of these commands, all of the state of the build will be in a single locked instance. One of the secrets of scaling first is to limit your problem as much as possible so it fits on one machine. I recommend with this server feature to definitely limit the size of your build to something that fits on a single machine. I know that some people didn't, and that is not something SBT is designed for. Anyway, the goal here is, since we're syncing the state across all these different pieces, if I compile in the terminal, I will see it in the IDE. Okay? And we're exposing auto-completion APIs. We're exposing all sorts of fun ways of interacting. Another thing that we're trying to get to with this, and play is the experiment right now, if you have custom SBT types and things that you want to expose, you do so through the SBT server, and then you can consume it on a plugin. We're already doing this with Activator just for really simple things like show the play UI after it loads. Hopefully, this will be open for the community, all sorts of fun customizations, but you can see things feeding through this server. Okay, so recap, what we're doing, event-driven API on SBT's build structure. Your builds actually don't change. The only thing you'll need to pull in is this thing called a UI context in a plugin, where if you want to read a line of input or somehow interact with a user, you have to go through this. If you want to fire events out, custom events, you fire it out that way. And you can annotate serializers on your task keys and your setting keys, and then they'll get serialized out the server. So that's what the 1.0 changes. Other than that, fundamentally nothing changes. The other thing is we're going to be sharing our build state now between IDEs and SBT. So SBT becomes your development environment automation. Okay? It's an engine to build an IDE. All right, auto plugins. We're rethinking plugins. We called this Project Natures at first, but it turns out that we like types better than random strings. So what this becomes is now I can define a plugin called an auto plugin. This works just like SBT plugins today. The difference is this project settings bit. Anyone remember when all SBT plugins used project settings and they got included in all of your projects no matter what? Yeah, okay, that was bad. That was terrible. You just can't willy-nilly include yourself in a project. The fundamental thing here in SBT is you include a plugin at a build level, but you can have multiple sub-projects. And you only want to include a plugin in certain projects. Okay? You don't necessarily want it in all of them. So what we have is a select clause that says the PGP plugin requires the project I'm being added to be an IV module plugin project. I need these settings. Okay? I need that nature on this project. And then your settings get added by default to that project. What's interesting is I can also define global settings in here that will only get added if a project in the build wants me. They won't get added if I'm not needed. Okay? The other cool thing is, since all of this information is available statically, it's not dynamically created, we can index all of the tasks in a plugin. And if you include the plugin in your plugins.sbt and you call a task and it's not defined on the project, we have an index of all those tasks. We can say, oh, this is defined on this plugin. Here's why we didn't call it. So we won't just say, can't find the task. We'll actually say, here's why. Here's how you can include it. Okay, so it's really about getting visibility and defining dependencies across plugins. This is what it'll look like from a user perspective. If a plugin can't just automatically be added, SBT will by default have a few natures, a few plugins. We're going to split out defaults into plugins. There'll be a few on projects by default. You can remove them. You can add new ones, and this will define how things automatically get blended. So if a plugin is automatically added that's causing problems, you can exclude it. What this doesn't solve is the whole can I resolve a plugin bit. I think we're going to have to look into that separately. Here's what we're looking at for splitting out default settings. There'll be core settings that have to be added to everything because they control the SBT engine. And then we have an IV module setting, a Java Scala setting, and possibly tests. I don't know if we're going to split those out as a separate plugin. I don't think it looks likely right now. And then the idea is that community plugins can directly depend on these via auto plugins and automatically get wired in. So in the future, when you want to add PGP, you don't write it in like 3 places. And the beauty of this is if I'm in a IDE and I want to add PGP related features to projects, I can just programmatically add the PGP plugin and the settings get wired to the right spot because the plugin developer has told me how to do that. So this is actually, funny enough, this feature helps automation way more than users. It just happens that it also helps you not have to write as much in your builds. So that's the last feature. You know, IV will resolve conflicts and dependencies at a binary level. Auto plugins are just about defining dependencies on project settings. And then beyond that, there's this notion of process management, attaching debuggers, doing auto class reloading like you have in Play for any project whatsoever. These are the kind of things we want to go to, right? Like SBT becomes a dev tool. It becomes the engine for your developer experience. That's where we're taking it. I'd really love to have a hosted presentation compiler so that all editors are on equal footing for giving you a really great experience. That will happen in my dreams. For now, we'll see. I have a minute, so I can take a question. Yes?
Emacs question, right?
What?
There's a picture of Emacs on like supported things for SBT server.
Yeah, so I haven't reached out to the Enzyme guys. I would love to have, I mentioned Emacs because the idea is we want things like Enzyme to be able to rip this in. I do not have time to write that integration. I barely have enough time to finish the server. So, well, and our team, I should say. One up here.
Where does Zinc fit into all this?
Okay, so the question is about SBT and Zinc. Where does Zinc fit in? Zinc is just the incremental compiler. Just the incremental compiler. SBT is all of the tasks and automation you have about the project, including packaging, and the idea of hosting like the presentation compiler. That is something that is specific to your build. You have to know all of the Scala arguments you want, that kind of stuff. Zinc is literally just, I'm going to compile your code. So in here, we'll have hooks to attach REPLs and all that kind of fun. Any other question? Yes? Oh, what's the current state? Well, there's a prototype. It's kind of lame. So there's a SBT remote control package where you can see the current state of the server. It's under a branch called whip model view server. Right now I'm just booting up, connecting to the SBT server, and this is my 200 lines of really, really crappy Scala code to implement a terminal on SBT on top of the server. So there's portions that we know are stable and portions that are still experiments. So if you look at the code, things that are in the SBT package are firm, things that are not firm. You can see here I can run tasks. There's autocomplete, that sort of thing. If I run compile, it compiles. And let's start up. Okay. We'll start up another client just so you can see this. This is in the same directory. Right now, we do the server locking of only one server per directory. So if you have a build defined at a directory, that controls all of the subprojects for that directory. That's where the server lives. There's only one instance of it ever. You see that one started up way faster because I'm just connecting to a live server. If I type name, it'll tell me the project name. Yeah. Or it won't because I'm inactive. Oh, hey, there it told me the project name on the other side. Yeah. Thanks, guys. Yeah. Okay. And looks like I have another deadlock issue in my terminal because again, the terminal this is a throwaway thing I just wrote for a demo for today. Yes.
Do you foresee people actually running this on a server, like in the cloud or on a local machine?
Do I see people running a server in a cloud? I am terrified of the security implementations of such a thing right now, but I do think that will probably happen at some point.
You have a lot of processing power in the cloud, you know, it's kind of difficult.
Yeah, you could run it in the cloud and then send your things over. The thing about running in a cloud though is that you need your editing then somehow exposed via the cloud, and you need this like a way of syncing the files between where you're editing them and the SBT server. So I think cloud is definitely like on the path, but I don't think it's a 1.0 thing because I think there's a lot of other tooling that has to be built up around that first. It's definitely, if you want to talk my vision for SBT 2.0, it's even crazier, but that's part of it. Yeah.
Does that, in the cloud thing, does that intersect with your vision? What should replace Ivy?
Yeah, we have to replace Ivy by then. I mean, the main reason we have to replace Ivy is because it doesn't make me happy. So.
What are you going to replace it with?
That's the reason why we haven't switched yet. I looked into Aether. We did a bunch of investigation into it. I don't know if you're familiar with Ivy. It has this notion of configurations that we leverage heavily. Aether has, you have those Maven attachments that you can attach to artifacts, but you can't control the dependencies of the attachments separately from the module. And so, yeah, the model just doesn't work. Like we can't actually translate over. So then we were looking at Gradle, actually made their own dependency manager. So we talked with them a little bit. That one, right now, I'm not going to import all of Gradle into SBT just to use dependencies, and it's all kind of together. So we tried to rip it out, but it didn't work. Yes?
Is tooling around version numbering so that like it's kind of semantically meaningful in some kind of way out of scope for SBT to do, or is that like?
So I want the actual module system, as you saw in that slide. Oh, let me just show my deadlock here. You guys enjoy that? That's the danger of live code. If you saw in the that's the server. in the slide of how we want to specify our plugins, I'd really love for the Ivy part to be completely abstracted and have an Ivy plugin that sits off of a generic I expose myself somehow to the world interface. Right? That's how you should feel every time you publish to Maven Central, by the way. But yeah, I'd like to be able to do that so we can start experimenting with other things. The reality is that, especially some of the advanced usages that people are doing, we're really tied to Ivy's API right now. So if we swap, it is going to be a breaking change. That's going to be a major SBT revision. And the ecosystem is not, there is nothing I can switch to right now safely for the 1.0. So that would be a next step, if that helps. But yeah, I consider that kind of a orthogonal concern to SBT core, but that doesn't mean that the SBT team wouldn't work on it. Yeah.
Two questions. Will the server be the default mode of running SBT? Second question, what about remote debug? Right now I can run a play application or just some main method and attach my ID and debug some CD code.
Yeah, so the question is, I'm totally out of time. I don't know if you want to kick me off, but
Last question.
okay, this is the last question about remote debugging. So there are basically two things that I'm going to mention there. One is I blasted past it. We're going to have a process forking API in SBT where you'll be able to attach to the input and output console and attach debuggers, and we might actually include a default agent to do code reloading. I don't know how far that's going to go. So that's what the longer term plan is for a 1.0. The prototype server will be available in 0.13 shortly after 0.13.2. There'll be a binary compatible one that you can start playing with. It won't be the default until 1.0. In 1.0, the server will be the default. Otherwise, all of this falls apart because all of that nice shared state you have in the file system, you start to try to have multiple processes sync across it, and then it's madness, just pure madness. So we have to go to a single server. Yeah, so I think that answered both questions. Thanks.